Welcome to Grayson's Creek Chronicles, a warm little hideaway tucked between rustling trees, watercolor woods, and the hum of a gentle creek. Around here, we celebrate slow moments, fall colors, soft yarn, and stories that feel like home. Pull up a chair on the porch. You're right on time. Returning to Hollow Bend. Before the pines began to whisper again, before the stones answered back, it helps to remember what Hollow Bend does to people. Not all forests are the same. Some are simply trees and trails and shadows shifting with the sun. But Hollow Bend is different. It keeps time the way water does, by circling, by returning, by wearing a path through stone with patience. Griffin, the hermit most folks only spoke about in lowered voices, had learned to live with that kind of patience. He listened more than he spoke. He watched the weather and the needles of the pines, the mood of the creek, and the way it broke around rocks. And then Lark arrived, mud on her boots, worry in her eyes, carrying a question that wouldn't sit still. Where had her brother gone? And why did every path she followed seem to bend back toward this place? The night before, the cabin had creaked like it was remembering old winters. The fire had burned low. Outside, something had moved through the trees with a careful, listening tread, close enough to be real, distant enough to doubt. Morning arrived quietly in Hollow Bend. Night didn't break with fanfare or bird song, but eased open slowly, its darkness loosening, thread by gentle thread. A pale gold light filtered through the cabin window, painting soft shapes across the wooden floor. The edge of Griffin's boots by the door, the outline of the table, the gentle curve of a kettle waiting to be warmed. The cabin smelled of yesterday's smoke and cedar, clean, sharp, and calming. Somewhere in the walls, the wood gave a quiet pop as it adjusted to the chill outside. Lark was still asleep beneath the cedar-scented quilt, her breathing slow and even, an uncommon peace after the restless tension she'd carried the night before. Griffin watched her for a moment from the doorway to the small room, long enough to make sure the tightness in her brow had softened, long enough to see that her hands weren't clenched anymore, and long enough to remind himself that some worries look lighter only because sleep is holding them down. He moved quietly, habit guiding him. A glance at the latch, a hand over the cold iron of the stove, the small inventory every solitary person learns to do without thinking: firewood, water, weather, and whatever else might be watching. Griffin stepped outside, letting the cool morning air settle around him like a familiar friend. Mist hovered low over the creek, like breath held in the lungs of the valley. Dew clung to fern fronds and spider webs, turning each thread into a thin line of silver. A squirrel scolded from somewhere high in a spruce. Farther off, a woodpecker tapped once, twice, then stopped, as if it too had decided to listen. The forest was calm, but not empty. Calm the way a pond can look smooth right before a storm breaks the surface. Calm the way a room can feel when someone has just stepped out, yet the shape of them still lingers in the air. Griffin had lived here long enough to know the difference between ordinary quiet and the kind that meant the woods were paying attention. It was in the way the needles didn't fall, in the way the birds chose other branches, in the way the creek seemed to hush itself at the bends. There was something in the air today, a subtle shift, a pressure behind the ordinary sounds, a whisper beneath the creek and the pines, as if the forest had taken a breath and was deciding whether to speak. Griffin closed his eyes and listened. He didn't strain for it. Straining chased things away. He let the sound come to him the way you let a shy animal decide you're safe. The forest had moods. Some mornings it felt like a song. Some mornings it felt like a warning. Today, it felt like a pause in a conversation that had started long ago and was only now being continued. Griffin walked down to the creek, boots brushing through dew-damp grass. Each step left a brief dark print that vanished as the blades sprang back upright. He followed the same route he always did, past the splitting stump he used as a chopping block, past the line of stones that marked the edge of the floodplain, past the alder that leaned like it was eavesdropping. He knelt at the water's edge, palms pressing into cold pebbles. The creek ran so clear it looked like the stones were floating in glass. He cupped his hands and drank, sharp, clean, cold, that made his teeth ache in the best way possible. He let it sit in his mouth for a second, tasting the mountain in it, the pine needles, the mineral bite of the rocks. And then he heard it. A faint sound, barely more than a breath, threaded through the creek's music. A voice. Not the kind the mind invents when it's tired. Not the trick of the wind against bark. It had shape. It had intention. Like someone standing at the edge of the trees, careful not to step into sight. Not loud, not urgent, just calling. The way you call for someone you expect to answer. The way you call when you're sure the distance will close if you keep speaking. Griffin lifted his head slowly, water dripping from his hands back into the stream. The voice drifted through the trees like a memory carried on the wind. Soft, distant, and almost familiar. Not his own name, not Lark's. Something older than either of them, brushed with a tone that made the back of his neck tighten. He didn't answer, not yet. In Hollow Bend, you learned early, some calls were invitations, some were hooks. The forest could mimic things, a loved one's laugh, a footstep behind you, the quick syllables of your name, until you turned toward it and got lost in the turning. So he stayed still and listened, letting the silence around the sound tell him what the sound itself would not. When it faded, it didn't feel like it ended. It felt like it stepped back into the trees and waited. Griffin rose, brushed the cold from his fingers, and headed back up the slope toward the cabin, moving with the careful steadiness of someone who didn't want to startle the day into becoming something worse. When Griffin returned to the cabin, Lark was awake, sitting at the small wooden table, hands wrapped around a cup of spruce tea, as if warmth could keep her thoughts from spilling over. A few thin slices of dried apple lay on a plate between them. Food Griffin had set out earlier, untouched. The tea steamed. Lark didn't sip. She looked up as he entered. You heard it too, didn't you? Her eyes searched his face, not for comfort, but for confirmation, as if the answer might change what was real. It wasn't just a sound. It had that cadence, like he used to call me when we were kids. half teasing, half worried I'd done something stupid. Griffin didn't pretend otherwise. "I heard something, yes," he said. "But Hollow Bend has a way of borrowing voices. Don't let hope run ahead of you so fast it can't hear where it's stepping." Lark swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cup. It sounded like him, like my brother. The words came out like they'd been waiting behind her teeth all night. She told Griffin quietly about the last message she'd gotten from him. Short and oddly careful. About the way he'd written that he'd found, quote, "something that doesn't want to be found," end quote. About the place name that kept appearing in old notes and local stories, Hollow Bend. Griffin didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. Griffin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat down across from her like he was placing his weight gently onto thin ice. Instead, he set a small wooden box on the table, its lid worn smooth by years of use, and pushed it toward her. "Try drawing what you remember," he said. "Not what you think you remember. What comes up first? Places, shape, anything. Sometimes the hands know what the mind can't hold," he told her. Lark hesitated, staring at the box for a moment, and then gently lifted the lid and pulled out a piece of charcoal. At first, the charcoal only made uncertain marks, light, testing lines. Then her hand steadied, as if it recognized the way before she did. A ridgeline, sloping like a shoulder beneath a blanket of trees. A crooked pine that leaned hard to the east, its top split like a forked finger pointing. A narrow footbridge over a stream, just planks, no railing, like the kind you cross quickly without looking down. And then finally, a stone, half sunk into the earth. She darkened its edges, then drew the mark carved into its face, a circle with 3 lines radiating outward. When the symbol appeared on the page, Lark's breathing hitched, as if the charcoal had pulled it from somewhere inside her chest. Griffin leaned closer. He knew that symbol very well. His expression changed in a way that was almost too small to notice, like a shutter closing. Griffin nodded once. "I've seen it." He tapped the paper once, lightly, as though testing if the mark might answer back. They used to carve those as markers, not for tourists, not for hunters, for people who knew the rules, people who understood that some places in these woods don't like being named. Hope flickered in Lark's eyes, fragile but bright. "Can you take me?" Griffin hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect for the forest's moods. "Hollow Bend don't always welcome visitors. But today it looks like it wants us to go." They set out just after midday, following a narrow trail that wound between towering pines. The deeper they walked, the quieter the forest became. Birdsong faded, the breeze stilled. Even the creek's voice softened, as if holding its breath. Griffin paused at a fallen log covered in moss. "Did you hear that?" Lark shook her head. "I don't hear anything." Griffin nodded. "Exactly." The silence was thick, not empty, but full of intention. They stepped into a clearing ringed by ancient stones. Each one bore the same symbol Lark had drawn, the circle with 3 lines. Lark's breath caught. I've seen this place in dreams or memories or something. Griffin nodded. This place is older than the cabin, older than any map. Your brother may have passed through here. Lark knelt beside one of the stones, tracing the carved lines with trembling fingers, and then the voice came again, not distant this time, not faint, close, very close, and calling her name. Lark stood abruptly, eyes wide, heart pounding. That was him. I know it was. Griffin listened. The forest was alive with sound now. Whispers in the branches, rustling in the underbrush, the echo of footsteps that weren't theirs. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lark. Stay close. The voice came again, clearer, stronger, pulling them deeper into the unknown. Griffin felt the shift in the air, the same one he'd sensed days before. Hollow Bend was waking up, and whatever lay ahead was no longer just Lark's search. It was Griffin's too. As the last threads of this moment settle into quiet, we'll leave our friends here. Take a slow breath with me. Stories like this tend to linger, like a lantern's warmth in the dark, or a creek whispering just beneath the surface. And though this chapter closes, the path ahead is already waiting with gentle surprises and a light that finds us when we need it. Thank you for being here at Grayson's Creek. I hope it left you with a touch of warmth. Come back when you're ready. Another story is already stirring, and I'd love to share it with you.